This video here, we're going to talk 40-yard dash technique. Again, the complete technique involved with running a 40-yard dash or a linear sprint goes a little beyond the scope of this course, but we are going to cover a few things that if you can put these on your checklist, if we can accomplish some of these things, then we're doing a pretty good job and we're in a good place. So getting a good angle here. First thing we're going to talk about is called toe off. That is when the back foot is beginning to come off of the ground here. What we want to see from this phase of the sprint, this is a better look at it here, is that the back foot should be roughly perpendicular to the ground, going straight up and down. You can see his is a little bit of a curve, but also we're not getting every frame here. There should be a slight bend in the rear knee, which you see. It's not a stiff, locked out leg. There is a slight bend in that back knee here. The other thing, the toe on the front leg, we want it to be underneath the knee. Now, it's a little bit behind the knee here, those toes, so that front shin could be a little bit more forward, but this is still pretty good overall position. The back hip should be an extension, and what we mean by that is that we get a straight line here from shoulder to knee, if not slightly behind. Also, we're looking at a roughly 90-degree angle between the thighs, which that's pretty close there. We want the ribs down and the core to be braced, which it appears to be here. What we wouldn't want is for the core to look here, angled backwards. And then each forearm should be roughly parallel, which we get a pretty good look at here. And then the front arm should be a little bit more closed than it is right here. So we have to go in really close, but you can see this front arm here is pretty close to 90 degrees. When we're sprinting, we actually don't run with equal 90-degree angles at the elbows for each arm throughout the cycle. The front arm is a little bit more closed of an angle, a little less than 90 degrees, and the back arm should be a little bit bigger than 90 degrees. The next phase we're going to talk about is maximum vertical projection. So remember, we talked about it in the acceleration video or the 10-yard split video, that in acceleration we spend more time on the ground. Well, in top speed, which is what we're at here, ground contact time is low, air time is much higher, and there's a lot of force coming into the ground because not only is our body weight, but now we're adding all the speed on top of it. So we have to be strong enough to absorb and produce force into the ground. And then we have to, last thing I'll mention here is we want to emphasize the stride rate. So in this phase here, this second phase we'll talk about can be known as maximum vertical projection. As you'll see, both feet are off the ground. That's where it gets its name. And remember, we talked about when we're accelerating in that 10-yard split, we really shouldn't have a period where both feet are floating too far off the ground. What we want to see here in max vertical projection is that the toes in the front are pointed up, and here they're about parallel with the ground, which is good. We don't want to see them hanging down like we see with the back foot here. The knee joint in the front leg, we want it a little higher than 110 degrees. We want approximately 90 degrees between these hips, just like we did at the last phase, which we're getting. Same thing, we still want to see a straight line from the shoulders to the knee, but what you'll notice now is that the back knee is bending a little bit more. Arm swing, and keep in mind here that the arms do come inward slightly towards the midline of the body, which you can see here. This arm isn't just going straight forward. it's coming in towards the midline of the body, and we can see a better visual here of the front arm is a little bit tighter than 90 degrees, then the back arm is a little bit more open, and those arms are remaining parallel here in this frame here. And then lastly, neutral head. And even this athlete could probably have their head slightly pointed down a little bit more. If the head is here, could be pointed a little bit more, but that's a good neutral head, and we want that to be relaxed as we're sprinting so that our shoulders aren't too tense. The more tension we're creating in our shoulders, the less freedom we have, and it's going to slow us down. Next phase we're going to talk about is strike, which is about here as this front leg begins to straighten out, preparing for the ground. We want this rear leg thigh to be close to perpendicular to the ground. And here we're not quite getting it. It's actually a little closer to parallel with the ground. Let's see if on a different stance, if one leg is a little bit different. This one's a little bit better here, but we want actually the leg to look more like this, a little bit closer to there, so a little sooner, but this is a better look at it. We want that shin angled towards the ground. The front leg should have a good stretch on the hamstring, so like we see here, this front leg hamstring is stretched, preparing for the contact with the ground. And then the front foot, this is actually a great view of it. You can start to see the bottom of his shoe. The front foot should supinate, which means the foot should turn outward so that the outside of the foot hits the ground first. So as you can see, we can see the bottom of his cleat. So it's a great visual that the outside of the foot is going to hit first, and then you roll to the midfoot and finish extending on the inside of the foot, or that big toe. Next we'll talk about touchdown, or it's when that leg comes in contact with the ground right here. So this is a pretty good visual. We want this front foot to come in contact with the ground just in front of the hip. Next we want to see that the knees working upward are roughly together, which they are right here. So that's a great job. The bottom of the rear foot should be pointed up towards the sky. So similar to the last phase we were discussing, I'd like to see that shin a little bit closer and then that foot pointed right up to the sky, which will allow that leg to cycle through and step over the bottom knee of that strike foot. This phase, both arms are together. Trying to say both arms are together just as the knees are together, and then yet again we have a neutral head from our touchdown position. Last phase we'll discuss here is our stance phase, and that's when our foot is directly underneath of our hip. From this position, this top foot, we want our toes to be up. So we're doing a decent job here, but we'd rather that foot be pointed straight down so our toes are up as much as they can be, as opposed to that foot pointing straight back. So we're kind of in the middle there. We can do a little bit better job of that. We want the legs to be in this figure 4 position, which they are. And as we discussed earlier, here is where that foot's transitioning from having the weight on the outside of the foot to rolling inwards to that big toe.